TV Makers is sponsored by RIMS, the Albert-vetted digital releasing platform. Welcome back to TV Makers. I'm Ashley Golder, and this is part 2 of my conversation with legal expert and co-CEO of Reviewed and Cleared, Clare Hoban. We unpack the world of legal in TV, and it's been incredibly valuable hearing from Clare's experiences so far. If you're just joining the conversation though, I'd recommend listening to part 1 first, before continuing the conversation here for part 2. And just a quick reminder, this interview was recorded earlier in 2026. So whilst we've done our best to keep everything up to date, this is not legal advice. Things change, and if you need definitive answers, do reach out to Clare and her team. All right, let's get into it for part 2 right after this. I am so excited to say that RIMS is back, sponsoring this series of TV Makers, and honestly, they're a game changer. As the industry's digital releasing platform, RIMS handles contributor releases, location agreements, material licenses, and more, helping productions stay organized, secure, and paper-free. It's fully GDPR compliant, Albert certified, and having used RIMS myself on numerous productions, I can genuinely say it makes the whole process that much smoother. So leave the paper releases behind and head over to rims.tv and be sure to mention TV Makers when you get in touch. This episode is sponsored by Linkline Crew, a family-run business with over 40 years of filming knowledge. Linkline connects productions with some of the best crew and production talent working across the UK. From television and branded content to podcasts, live events, sport, and social content, you name it, they crew it. Head to linklinecrew.com. How do you tackle something that is perhaps legally defensible, but ethically questionable?
So the first thing is if someone comes to me, I always have to obviously give them the legal position. Mm-hmm. And it may well be that that production company also sort of values my view on the ethics of something. Mm-hmm. What I have to be really careful about not doing, and it isn't my role, is to editorialize. It's not my role to comment on whether I like that program or I like that particular way that they've done something. And someone in my role should not veer into editorializing. But I can talk about ethics and advise on ethics if they want me to.
Is there ever a grey area though, where legal and ethics do kind of mold together and where if you're not ethical, it's now illegal?
Yeah, I think if you were to make a program in a particular way, then you risk undermining, for example, the Ofcom code in the way that you obtained information.
Do you have an example to help my head?
Yeah, if you were like misleading a contributor, for example, and you were so desperate to get this contributor that you made assurances and you made promises about, maybe you said, oh, just come and do this interview and you can change your mind later. And that got them over the line, and that got them to sit in front of the camera, and that got the interview in the bag. And that is a risk, particularly for more junior members of staff that are really feeling the pressure to secure that interview and do what's asked of them. And sometimes that can go a bit wrong, and the wrong assurances can be given to a contributor. So a contributor may have been promised that they've got editorial control, which is something you should never, ever do. You should never cede editorial control to anybody. Yeah. It belongs with the production company and the broadcaster at all times.
Which I should remind you, Claire, you have no editorial control over this episode of the podcast. Thank you very much for coming on board.
Well, I may have a few legal comments.
Yeah, that's fine. Carry on.
So in that situation, your worst case scenario is that someone has been misled. Right. And in that situation, you have a breach of the regulatory code. You haven't necessarily treated someone fairly as a contributor, and there are ethical issues with what you've done. So yes, I think definitely with the Ofcom code, that definitely sort of converges with ethics as well, particularly. But sometimes it's okay under the Ofcom code, it's okay legally, and a production company will still say, can we just have a chat about, we just want to know what you think about what we're doing. And then you just become, you're brought in, it's more of a crisis management role where you're brought in and you're like a sensible head in the room. And I do that role for quite a lot of production companies. It's actually really interesting.
Well, let's talk about the topic of consent. So within TV, we have, sometimes they're a lot longer than others. Consent forms, there might be 3 pages, there might be 1 page. Depends on the program, depends on what you need to put into it. But there is a myth or an idea that at any point that, especially with GDPR coming in, that contributor can actually withdraw consent. Is that real?
No.
No?
As a contributor, if you sign a contributor form, in a vast majority of cases, if you fully understand how you will appear in the program and why you've been involved and what you're contributing to, then in most cases, it would be very difficult for you to pull out. Now, there are exceptions to that where really what you're showing of that person is so sensitive that really you have to accept that their privacy rights are so strong that even them signing a form, maybe you need to be offering them what is in effect ongoing consent right up until, for argument's sake, the point of broadcast. And a medical program is quite a good example of that.
And just explain ongoing consent, because I was going to move on to that. And we are told now on most productions that ongoing consent is a thing. And it's actually something I remind my contributors. There is ongoing consent. Please just let us know what that means.
So particularly if it's a vulnerable contributor, ongoing consent is that you are checking in with them and that you're checking that they're still happy to be involved in a program. And there are lots of kind of programs where we might have a level of ongoing consent. It'll look different depending on the program, but you could have a level of that with reality programs, with medical programs where you've got vulnerable contributors that maybe have their own issues like substance abuse issues, where cognitively you need to keep checking that they're okay.
Yeah.
It can really vary on the content, but ongoing consent is definitely a thing, and sometimes it's the right thing to do.
And does that mean somebody signed a consent form and they can't withdraw that unless there's exceptional circumstances? Ongoing consent, does that mean that they can withdraw their consent completely or up to that point?
It's always going to be really fact specific as to whether someone can withdraw consent. Even if you're doing ongoing consent, I would still say, right, let's stop. You've done ongoing consent. You've been checking in with them and now they've decided that they don't want to be in the program. When someone withdraws consent, it's not about literally lifting their contribution out of a program. There may be lots of steps that we could take. So one is, the first thing you need to do is absolutely bottom out what their concerns are, because most of the time you can reassure someone about the things that they're worried about. And quite often people will worry about their depiction and get the wrong end of the stick about maybe how they have come across in a program, and they're worried about that, or they'll tell you what their insecurity is and you can allay their fears. It might be that certain things need to not be in the cut that they've highlighted to you and that's acceptable to you as production, and therefore they were happy to carry on being in the program. Or it might be that you get really far down the line and their right to withdraw is very strong. Maybe they've got very strong privacy rights or other extenuating circumstances, or they're extremely vulnerable and we're worried about welfare issues, for example. And if we thought, okay, it's difficult now to keep them in the program, there are still other things that can be done, like anonymizing them, editorial techniques, blurring, editing around it. It's not necessarily that they're suddenly going to be removed from a program. So this is so fact specific as to how you would deal with withdrawal of consent in each set of circumstances that there isn't a one size fits all answer to that, but it's definitely something that comes in all the time. But the one thing I would say is, if you have a bog standard contributor who has come in and is making a contribution on camera and they sign a contributor release, or they give you other indications that they are very happy to be in the program and they completely understand what the program is about, in those scenarios, it is so difficult for them to withdraw consent at that point. And we can take a really hard kind of line on it. It's always fact specific, but it's very likely that you're going to be able to resist that kind of withdrawal of consent.
Do you even need a consent form? If you've been filming somebody for 2 hours, you've explained they're very aware of what you're filming. And then at the end, I mean, you shouldn't, but at the end, that's when you do a release form and they go, I'm not signing this.
So A consent form is the gold standard because there's a lot of things in it that cover you off contractually in terms of things like copyright and things. There's always like a paragraph on that in it that really sets out what your rights are. So a contributor release form signed is the gold standard. If you don't have that, there are other ways to evidence consent, and we would be looking at just the way that person has interacted with you, the fact they've turned up and sat and been filmed by you, any interactions you've had on WhatsApp and email and by telephone. And if you are having phone calls with a contributor, it's always good to have a contemporaneous note or a record of those calls if it relates to them consenting to be in a program. So there are other ways that we can evidence consent, and it's not ideal because it's always better to have a consent form, but it's not essential that you have one if you end up in a situation where they said, I'm not signing that.
I think the consent chat moves us neatly onto duty of care within TV. I don't think we've cracked it yet. I think TV as a whole does a lot better than it has done. I think we've still got some ways to go, but at least the conversation is happening. But for you, from a legal standpoint, what are the consequences of bad duty of care for you?
Well, duty of care is something that aligns with what we have to do under the Ofcom Broadcasting Code. There's key sections of that relate directly to duty of care. And that's what's moved that whole conversation of duty of care on. It's been Ofcom. So it's less of a legal thing. It's more of an Ofcom thing. And I think if we get it wrong, then I think the risks to a potential contributor or someone that we feature in some way can be really serious, because it's about someone's welfare. It's about the impact that the being involved in the program has on them. And sometimes the impact of being involved in a program can be profound. So it's so important, and it's very genre specific as well, what that duty of care obligation is. So if you take reality, then there's going to be absolutely extensive duty of care documentation, protocols.
Well, there is now, sadly.
Yeah.
That was a learned lesson in the last, when was it? Within the last 10 years, but I think it's probably the last 7, 6.
Yeah, I think that's right. So the Ofcom code was changed because there were obviously people that took their own life as a result of being involved in a program. And there were other examples as well where the viewing public started to care a lot more when they saw the impact of a program on somebody that was appearing in a program. You know, there were moments like Danny Dyer, for example, being, I think, in Love Island, where she was really crying on scene through some kind of engineered scenario. And, you know, that sort of thing started to trigger thousands of complaints, and people started to care about how people, maybe particularly in reality, were being treated, sometimes a bit manipulated, you know, what their life was like after broadcast. And now we don't just have duty of care during a production period and during filming. We think about what our obligations are to someone after that program is finished. And if you take reality, for example, it's that recognition that many people involved in that are going to have 15 minutes of fame, and then their life has to in some way go back to a version of what it was before. But they may have pinned quite a lot on the fact that their life was going to change forever. And certain types of people get involved in those kind of shows that might have certain characteristics or vulnerabilities. And you have to take that into account as well and really manage the types of people that would be involved in a reality program. And, you know, we do a lot of work on reality shows, but reality shows are advised on by lawyers right throughout industry, from a whole range of broadcasters and lawyers. And it's really challenging work.
What particulars come to mind for you that you have to advise on for the duty of care? I mean, you would hope that the production company have their own robust duty of care measures already, but if they don't, or they're new to it and they're seeking advice, what would you usually go for?
You have to have really robust protocols from everything from casting to filming.
And what do those protocols do? Sorry.
So those protocols are going to be setting out how you're going to be interacting with them, what standards you're going to apply, the parts of the code that are going to be relevant, what psychological evaluations those individuals might need, what checks you're going to do, whether that's sort of criminal checks or, other kind of well-being checks, what talks you're going to have with those individuals about the reality of being in that program. And that can also involve letting them know the downsides of being involved in a program, not just what it will be like on a practical level day to day. It's about, if you're involved in this program, you might lose friends as a result. Your job may not be available to you when you leave. Your partner or your family members may be disappointed with disclosures that you've made.
And that's the challenge within casting as well, because part of casting, you need people to buy into your idea and to come on board. It's a really challenging job, casting. But there are some TV shows where harm is almost embedded into the format. And how do you ratify those for a duty of care? There are some reality shows that we know that people are going to be talked about, insulted, pressured by other members of the contributors, not hopefully by production, or game shows, or even competition shows, where the format is baked in and it's very easy for us to go, well, they know what they're signing up for. How do we keep duty of care where there is harm embedded into the format of the program?
It's firstly making sure people fully understand the format and what they'll be exposed to. But then it's about psychological safety as well. It's about having an ongoing process of psychological support. So you can't just have a psych eval and a psych evaluation, and that's it. And then that person's robust enough to be in the program. It's about having support there, that they have regular check-ins, and also additional support is always available to them when they want extra support as they go through. So it's not just about saying, right, everyone in the show is going to have 6 psychological check-ins. It's about having a whole system there where wherever they need additional support, or where any production welfare officers that are working on the team observe that they think that person needs extra support, that they're encouraging them to go and speak to, the program psychologist that's been assigned to them, and have a kind of debrief with them. So everything is about ongoing psychological support in that scenario, as well as managing people's expectations about what they're getting involved in and doing that from the outset.
What I imagine is a very difficult, if also not traumatic thing for you to have to deal with in your work, is almost everything that we've spoken about in this interview coming together with consent, duty of care, defamation, people not wanting certain things being broadcast, and then them using threats to not have that go out, whether serious or not serious. And what I'm talking about are people who might say, if you do X, I will do Y. And that Y might be take their own life. It might be self-harm. It might be something heinous, something obviously that nobody wants to see happen. How do you tackle those scenarios? I don't even know how I would tackle those scenarios.
Yeah. So if someone is saying that if a program goes out or a certain thing is included in a program, then they're going to be in psychological danger or they're going to self-harm in some way, then that's always taken really seriously. It's really difficult to split it. So there isn't like it's definitely X or it's definitely Y. It's really fact specific. Sometimes you might ask for additional evidence that is how they feel. Have they been to a doctor? I mean, if we deviate from like reality, there are lots of other kind of programs where people might make these kind of statements if they don't want to be shown drink driving, if they don't want to be shown with their house being raided by the police. If you do think that there's a risk that someone's going to hurt themselves, then obviously the first thing you always do is not think about the program immediately. You're thinking, what can I immediately do for this person? And, that's when you'd be getting them as much help as what they needed. And then you'd have to take a decision about how they feature in the program and whether it's right for them to continue to be in the program. And you have to think about the impact of broadcast on them. But you just use every bit of emotional intelligence and life experience and program knowledge and your kind of knowledge of psychology, and you get all the proper professional stakeholders feeding in as well if needs be.
Does that decision among the big stakeholders and yourself have to be documented in a certain way before you can move forward?
Yeah, I think you would always document the outcomes. You would always keep a record of what discussions have been had. These kind of discussions are the ones that you'd be having with a broadcaster, with a streaming platform. You wouldn't be taking them in isolation. If you think that someone's well-being is at risk, then you would never be operating alone as a production company. You'd be discussing that with the broadcaster, and they would be bringing in their stakeholders as well. Right. So I think the thing with all of this is that it would be lovely if there was just a really black and white way that we would deal with all these scenarios. But nice, it's a matter of people coming to me with a set of facts, with a particular kind of program from a particular genre of like program making, with particular personalities of people that are involved in the program that we're taking into account. And we put all of that into the mix and we decide what to do.
Okay, let's talk about RIMS, the digital releasing platform who are proudly sponsoring this series of TV makers. RIMS are trusted by the biggest players in our industry, but do you know why? They streamline every release your production requires. We're talking contributors, locations, materials, NDAs, self-declarations, and even audience consents. All from a single platform. You can use a RIMS iPad, which makes things quick and easy, but one of my absolute favorite features are the QR codes. If you're in a hurry and have multiple people to release, you can have your contributors scan a QR code, sign on their own phone, and you're done. Dozens, if not hundreds of contributors released in minutes. RIMS works online and offline anywhere in the world. It's fast, flexible, and fully GDPR compliant. And because everything's searchable by name, date, location, release form type, post teams can find what they need in seconds. Plus, photos are stored with every form, so matching contributors is actually easy. It's Albert vetted, eco-friendly, and trusted across the industry. So head over to rims.tv to find out how they can make your releases a ton easier. And if you do get in touch, mention TV makers. I've got it on good authority. The team at RIMS like to look after people who come by the show. That's rims.tv. This episode is sponsored by Linkline Crew. I've worked on productions that booked crew through Linkline, and one thing I can genuinely say is that whether I'm working with someone I already know or meeting a crew member for the first time, the people from their books have always been fantastic. With over 40 years of filming knowledge and contacts, Linkline supplies trusted crew and production talent for TV, branded content, podcasts, sport, live events, social media, and more. Not only that, but when you get in touch, you're talking to a family-run business who understand the pressures and unpredictability of production because they've spent decades around it. They'll work with you to find the right crew, solve problems, and give your shoot the strongest possible foundations. So, when you're crewing up for your next project, head to linklinecrew.com. Well, then let's talk about maybe arguably the hardest part of legal. I mean, I'm taking a punt here, but crisis management. When might you have to kick in for crisis management?
There are so many things that fall into that camp. It's like really broad, but it's not uncommon for a production company to come to us only at the point of crisis.
Yeah.
So we might not have been involved in their program content at all. And it might be a viewer trust issue, where a certain set of facts has come to light, which has really undermined someone's contribution in a program, for example, or something in the program has misled viewers, or you get programs where it was all absolutely fine and then that person that's in the program has been arrested for an offence. And what do you do then?
So when you have someone come up to you with a crisis, maybe this is too broad a question, but what is the first thing that you stabilize within that production?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time it's like, let's just take it down a notch.
Okay.
That is often my sort of approach, which is whatever we're talking about, we're already at a point where it has happened a lot of the time. So let's just take it down a notch. So the first thing I always want to know is, who knows about this? Who out of all your staff is involved in this? What have you done so far?
So you're not looking immediately to attribute blame?
Definitely not.
Or to find a scapegoat, or to try and push that on somebody else?
No. I mean, in a way, if you ever get to a point with crisis management where you're attributing blame, that is really far down the line in terms of the investigation that you might do. Because everything you need to do needs to be measured and fair. And you need to bottom out what's happened. And if there's a problem, a broadcaster will usually say, well, I need a report on this. I need to know exactly what happened and how it happened, or what happened in the edit, or what happened with that contributor. And also, I am not a big fan in general of attributing blame, because quite often you might find someone junior did something.
Yeah.
But for that junior person to have done that thing, a lot of things have had to happen within that production company. Processes might have failed them.
Yeah.
And the idea that we just pin it on a junior person, or a person, under pressure in an edit suite. I mean, where does that get you? And the best production companies that I work with, that I kind of watch growing and evolving and often becoming more and more successful, is when they have a very feel free to refer things up. It's never too late to say something when you've gone wrong. Don't have a culture where people are afraid to report something up. You should have an absolute referral up process. There's never a point where it's too late.
Well, let me ask you this question. I was not going to ask you this earlier, because I didn't think it was relevant, but now it is super relevant. If you're on a production and the hierarchy is, say, for example, assistant producer, then to somebody like myself as a producer director, series producer, exec, etc. Usually you'd refer up to your own editorial chain, or maybe your production manager, head of production. Can somebody from that production, if they don't trust that hierarchy, get in touch with you? Can they skip all of that and go, Claire, I think something is deeply wrong here. I'm being told to do this. I feel very uneasy. What happens for you there? Do you have to tell the production? Is there confidentiality? You're being hired by the production, not that individual. But at the same time, there's someone asking for help.
Yeah. I mean, look, I would never not talk to somebody that wanted to talk to me about something to do with the production, and it was raising an issue. I think it still would be really clear. I'm instructed, for example, by the production company.
Yep.
So, if I felt like we were having a discussion that was putting me in a very conflicted position, then it might be that, I would say, okay, well, actually, I'm going to get you to talk to my colleague or whatever. But the thing that I would try and sort out would be, the fact that you felt like you had to speak to me rather than that you could speak to the people that you work with directly, and that I'm the only person that you felt comfortable speaking to. I'd try to get to a point where if I was armed with any information like that, that we could get everyone talking about it, and we could be starting to do this stuff and deal with these problems in a really transparent way.
Yeah.
But again, it comes back to, you should anchor yourself in, nobody running a production company should have a blame culture.
Except, I don't know, I see it a lot.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I see a lot of incredible people, and I've had the privilege to work with a lot of incredible people. But it would be remiss of me to say that those other people don't exist, whether individuals or companies.
And we're working in an environment where people are working on short-term contracts. They don't necessarily build up relationships of trust in the teams that they're in. It's transitory. People move on very quickly. They move on before the end of a production. And so that maybe that loyalty and that trust isn't always there. And they're not as comfortable as they might have been if they'd worked with someone for like a year or 2 years or 3 years.
I mean, I have very big feelings about this. I've harped on for years about the need for production companies to have mandatory debriefs for teams, because I think that's when you actually grow and learn about things that worked and didn't work, and how you can then move on and make that better. But like until debriefs are a thing, that's never
great
gonna happen.
idea.
No, I think so. Production companies don't agree. Some production companies don't agree, I should say. We're having a very legal chat. Allegedly, some production companies don't agree that a debrief would be useful. In a crisis scenario, what makes the situation worse?
Panicked, rushed decision-making.
Right.
Blame, early blame is really unhelpful.
Okay.
Let's just take a breath. And let's everyone speak, and let's work out what's happened, and let's row back from the situation we're in and work out who needs to know what and in what order we're going to do things, and just working out a plan. And the other thing I'd always say is you cannot beat drawing up a timeline. It's
love a timeline.
I love a timeline.
Yeah.
You know, a timeline is incredibly helpful for so many reasons. It gives you mental clarity. It really focuses the mind as to maybe the point at which something went wrong.
Yeah.
And quite often when you do a timeline, you'll also find when you think something leapt from 0 to 50, you'll look at that timeline and you'll realize sometimes, you know, actually the broadcaster knew. You know, the broadcaster also knew this was happening.
But this is where that blame comes in. How often do you hear a broadcaster going, we had an external production company who were dealing with this? And then as you're saying, like sometimes a broadcaster did know.
I think different channels deal with production companies differently. And some, I would say, keep them more at arm's length. And some are very willing to work very closely with them. And it's like we're all in it together.
Yeah. And that's how it should be.
Yeah.
At what point does a show have to get to for it to be pulled and not broadcast? And who makes that decision? Do you have to put your foot down sometimes and go, this cannot be shown? Or is everything that comes from you or from a legal person just advice?
Technically, I'm giving advice, and then there will be senior people above me that will decide whether to accept my advice. Now, it's a pretty risky thing to do, to be given legal advice from an experienced person and then ignore it and, you know, whatever. So there have definitely been times where I have been extremely forceful about my concerns in relation to something that's going to be broadcast. And sometimes I'm being forceful with a broadcaster, and I'm saying that because I feel that I'm there to protect the production company, and I feel that they're being put at risk by the content of a broadcast.
And with everything that we've said in this interview about, like, we've been very transparent in saying, look, tell us what's wrong, and then we'll try and make it right. And we'll try and work out different ways of saying something, or maybe not including something that would be bad. where does that program have to fail so much where it gets to the point where you go, this can't be shown?
Well, sometimes it's just because circumstances change. It can be something external to production that was beyond their control.
Right.
And that's probably more the case, actually, that it would be something new. Or if it comes about that actually you know that you've got something really seriously factually wrong, so it's materially wrong, then that could be a libel issue, that could be an Ofcom fairness issue. We should always be concerned if there are suddenly active proceedings, and that means that your programme is potentially very prejudicial and could risk, adversely affecting a trial. Then that's the sort of scenario where we really wouldn't want a programme to broadcast in its current form. It might be that we're saying, well, it could be shown if we tweak this and that, or if suddenly something is anonymised. But if I think there's a contempt risk, then I would be extremely vocal about that.
Well, we're coming towards the end of our podcast. Before I ask my final questions, like I said, I threw out some questions out into the audience and some came back to me. So I've got some questions from other people here. There's one here. Under GDPR, can a contributor demand access for all the footage you filmed of them, including rushes and unused material?
So this comes up all the time. A contributor has a legal right to make a subject access request, which is when they request material, that relates to their personal data. But when they're asking that of a media production company and they've been involved in programme making, they don't have an automatic right to have that material because one of the exemptions to handing it over might apply. And the one that we often as programme makers would look to rely on is the journalism exemption.
Right.
And that means that you've prepared content or you have materials that you've used as part of making something effectively for broadcast.
Yeah.
And there's a public interest in you having put that program together and done that work in some way. And the materials that you hold all relate to the creation of the program. So it's really hard for somebody that has featured in a program to request everything that the program has generated about them. And often it also means there's just such a huge amount of material that the man hours, the hours required to produce all of that material and dredge it all up would also have a completely disproportionate cost and time issue attached to them. But not just that. If it's journalistic material, which is any material generated for the purposes of programme making, then it is going to be very difficult. The one thing you're expected to do, though, is have an assessment and think about all the material that you hold in case there is some material that you can give. And then be sure that you're not going to give sort of everything else. But most of the time, that provides programme makers with a blanket exemption where the contributor isn't receiving really anything.
Right.
But there are other times that our material becomes like under threat. And sometimes it's the police that are trying to get our material.
Okay, yeah.
So you get the police and they might make a production order where they can go to court and try and get your materials off you.
Yeah.
But they have to jump through some really high hoops to do that. You should never just hand that over.
Yeah.
You should always get a lawyer involved. And then sometimes they don't even go through any proper process. And you could have a production team that was out with a load of cameras and recording equipment. And there have been scenarios where the police, maybe they're filming a demo or something like that, and the police will literally take their equipment. And I've had situations before where I've had journalists ringing me. I remember a time I was driving over Hammersmith Bridge, on the way to the BBC, and a programme team sort of contacted me and they said, a regional team just said, a load of police, we've gone down to Bristol, we're doing some filming, and a load of police just took our cameras. And it's a thing. It's one of those lines for me that you don't cross. It's like, do not take my programme maker's equipment.
So can the police not
They can't do it.
Why not? Why
because
do they think
don't have
can?
a legal right to do it. It would have to be, you'd have to be in some kind of very sensitive legal territory, like maybe terrorism or something like that. So in most cases, the police absolutely cannot just take your material when it's very clear that you are there as the media filming.
So this is fascinating, because being in similar scenarios, what does somebody on the ground say in defense of that before needing to phone you up?
Yeah, well, the thing they could say straight off is, we're in a public space, we're entitled to film, and you are not legally entitled to take or confiscate any of our equipment. You would have to go through proper process in order to get it. And you would be acting basically in contravention of PACE, which are the rules of evidence that they have to follow. So you could say that's in breach of PACE. You wouldn't be able to do that. We could bring a legal action against the police if you did that.
And that might help our production budgets, which are shrinking epically. Okay. So another question is, if a contributor says something important off camera, where let's say they've already signed a consent form, but they probably weren't aware that that camera was recording at the time, can they use it? And what do producers misunderstand about using that material?
Well, it depends what they're saying. If they're saying something sensitive, do you mean if it was recorded, like the audio is still recorded?
Yeah, or even, I mean, you see it almost as a technique now for documentaries where the cameras are rolling before they shout action.
I mean, yes, I think you can do that. I think if there was some kind of really sensitive disclosure being made, then it may be outside of what they thought that they were contributing for broadcast. But in general, if people are saying things and it's as they're putting their mic on or they're just having a little breather and they say something of note, particularly if there's a public interest in including it, then I think it's all up for potential inclusion.
I mean, I have had such an incredible chat with you, Claire. My brain is like jelly right now. I started saying at the beginning of this interview that this will be the longest conversation that I've had with, quote, legal. And now I think I need to lay down, absorb. Thank you so much for giving so much of your time to this. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you for TV Makers.
It's been lovely speaking with you. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of my conversation with Clare Hoban from Reviewed and Cleared. A huge thank you to you, Claire, for joining us across these 2 episodes and for being so open, practical, and generous with your knowledge. And thank you for listening or watching. And if you've enjoyed this conversation and picked up a few things you'll be very glad to remember the next time production gets complicated, do share it with someone else working in TV who might benefit from hearing it too. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to TV Makers, because there are plenty more conversations coming your way over the coming months. Don't forget, we're also on YouTube, where you can watch episodes from Series 4 onwards, and you can find the full TV Makers back catalogue wherever you get your podcasts. I'd love to know what you thought about this one. Maybe there are questions I missed that we can store up for a part 3. You can find us on Instagram at TVMakersPod, or email podcast@tvmakers.co.uk. Until the next episode though, take care.